it away.
Great. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the opening session for Secure Transaction Hackathon by OWASP WIA. I and Saman Fatima will be your speaker today for the opening session based on PCI-DSS requirements. Before we start, I quickly want to introduce myself, and Saman will introduce herself to the audience. So I'll quickly introduce myself first. So I'm the lead instructor currently in Flatiron School as a cybersecurity instructor, of course. And I'm part of communities like OWASP WIA, OWASP NYC. I'm lead at Infosec Girls NYC chapter and actually co-lead with Zoe. And currently I'm running a mentorship program also for individuals transitioning into cybersecurity under my initiative CyberPreserve, and I will be one of your speakers today for this opening session. So before I go further, I would like Saman to introduce herself. Saman, please go ahead.
Thanks, Aastha. Hi, everyone. So my name is Saman Fatima, and I am working as a DevOps engineer in Macquarie Bank here in India. And I have a really keen interest in cybersecurity. So I have been part of many communities. So I am actually trained in identity and access management, but I have an interest in other domains of cybersecurity as well. Currently, I am the Delhi chapter lead for Infosec Girls community, also member of OWASP Delhi, OWASP WIA, and now the VSIS India chapter. So I'm really looking forward for this hackathon, and good luck to all of you who are participating in this and would be watching our session. So over to you, Aastha.
Thank you. So what we are going to do today is we are quickly going to talk about PCI-DSS, which is directly associated with secure transaction processing and storage. So we are going to introduce PCI, and we are going to briefly walk through all the requirements of PCI-DSS, which will help you come up with some possible solutions for designing secure transaction-based web applications. So first of all, what is PCI? PCI is actually a payment card industry data security standard, which came across in 2005 and 2006. The companies associated with the Council of PCI-DSS are American Express, Discover, JCB International, MasterCard, Visa. All the 6 of them, they are expert in this payment card and finance industries. They came up with this solution of PCI-DSS compliance because across the world, we are now, and in the past few years, when debit cards, credit cards, they came up like in 2000s, it became important to come up with a common standard, and not only a common standard, but that standard which is more secure. So the experts from the industries, they came up with this standard which covers nearly 12 requirements, and these nearly 12 requirements help an organization build a defense in depth security architecture, especially referring to payment card processing, storage, and transmission. So what we are going to do is these 12 requirements, they come under 6 categories. So one by one, we'll be picking those 6 categories. Some of the categories will be covered by me, and some of the categories will be covered by Saman respectively. So before we go forward and discuss with the requirements, it's important to know what if you do not comply with PCI-DSS, what can be the possible grief consequences, XYZ organizations which are directly or indirectly involved in payment card processing, storage, and transmission. If they do not comply with the standard, what possible consequences they might have to go through. So I can give you an example once I walk through these consequences. So one of the first consequences would be fines. So if you are violating the compliance and an external audit goes on in your company, and during that external audit, if it is found that your company is not compliant under PCI-DSS, then definitely expensive fines. External audits will take place time and again in your company. Loss of customers. It's very common to actually lose your customers if your company's reputation goes at stake due to some security incident. How? Many of you who are living in the United States for a longer duration of time, or maybe across the globe, this was a common security news in 2013 regarding Target. So Target is actually a retail store. And what happened in 2013 was there were close to like 40 million credit card details which were being stolen from the Target's POS systems, and POS is actually your payment systems, which are operating when you make a credit card or a debit card payment. So 40 million credit card information was actually leaked at that point in December 2013 by Target. And that news actually spread like a virus. And due to that, the very first repercussions which they had to face was loss of customers. Because when customers, they knew their information is at stake, even I am there and I know some incident has happened in one of the organization where I buy products, I pay them. So definitely my first response would be, I won't go there again. So definitely loss of customers, loss of jobs. So the mostly loss of jobs of higher professionals, because when big incident happens, the higher senior management, especially the C-level executives, they are under the eye of review. So most of them, they are at the stake of losing their jobs. Company's reputation is at stake, lawsuits, legal proceedings, and a lot of legal proceedings happens, and the fines associated with legal proceedings are unimaginable. So definitely before I go and discuss the requirement, it becomes really important to discuss the consequences associated with not complying with these standards. Now, moving forward, these are the 6 categories under which these 12 requirements are put in. So what we are going to do is one by one, we'll be covering these major categories, which you see on the left-hand side. And each of these categories are covering 2 to 3 requirements out of all the 12 requirements. So let's first start with the very first category, which is build and maintain a secure networks and systems. Under build and maintain a secure networks and systems, PCI requirements talks about installing and maintaining a good firewall configuration. Firewall is actually a networking device. Basically, it is used for actually filtering traffic, which is coming from outside the organization's network. So basically, firewall works on rules. We configure for firewalls, and firewalls are like routers. So in the market, if you want to visualize how does a firewall looks like, it's basically looks like a router. It has its own set of configurations, which you have to do by managing and configuring the management protocol of the firewall. And based on that, you work on necessary configurations, you put on necessary rules. And what can be the rules? The rules of the firewalls can be associated with, for example, what kind of packets from outside network should be allowed inside the network. Another, when we are talking about packet information, network packet information, it varies from the packet header information and content information. So based on that, you can create some rules that what kind of IP addresses are allowed, what kind of IP addresses are not allowed. So you can create some blacklisting filters, whitelisting filters. You can block certain ports. So those configurations are very much important when we talk about installing and maintaining a firewall. The second thing which we are going to talk about under this category is do not use vendor supplied default passwords. So basically, do not use vendor supplied defaults means whenever in your systems you are installing maybe any Tomcat server, okay, maybe any antivirus, or maybe any kind of application. So usually those applications and softwares, they come up with some default passwords. So do not continue to use these default passwords, because these default passwords are widely available and readily available over the internet. If the attacker is gathering information about your organization and they are targeting your organization for a certain kind of attack, their first step of attack would be information gathering. When they are doing information gathering, before even touching the outskirts or the boundaries of the organization's network, they will try to gather as much as information which is available on the internet. And these default passwords are widely available on the sites. Once you go to a particular software download page, in the details, you can look at what are the default passwords. Some websites, they have actually create password and username and password dumps actually for these kinds of common softwares. So as much as it is useful for us as professionals to see what's happening over the internet, this information is useful for the attackers to attack. So they gain this information, and based on that, they try to build exploits. This is one thing. Second thing associated with this is, if you are not using default passwords, then set strong password techniques, use strong passwords, set password restrictions, set good password expiry dates. So when will your passwords expire? What are some strict password deadlines? And right now in organization, it's there. Like after 1 month, your password will nearly expire and you have to change it. You don't have a choice. You don't have a choice to ignore it. So these password related policies are very much important in order to implement a secure system, especially a system which should not be broken with the brute force attacks, especially applications that should not be easily identified and exploited using default password. And same goes with software. Sorry. The next kind of requirement which comes under PCI-DSS is the category, sorry. So under the category, protect cardholder information, here comes 2 pointers. One of your pointers is protect stored cardholders data. Second second requirement under this category is encrypt transmission of cardholder data across open public networks. Now, how we are going to achieve first categories? Under this category, the area of cyber which will come is your cryptography. So under cryptography, we talk about strong encryption techniques, hashing techniques. So all will be implemented here. Over the internet, we now use HTTPS. So the S in HTTPS stands for SSL. So using strong SSL TLS protocol is the need of the hour when we are transmitting data over a public network. So for example, if you are making a transaction on an e-commerce site, so whenever you press submit, you submit your credit card information and detail over a transaction, and it goes over to the merchant. So what happens is that information transition, when it is transmitted from the e-commerce website to the merchant side, it should be under an encrypted channel, and that encryption should be strong. What does that mean? Encryption should be strong. That means that the SSL protocol, which you're using from it for encryption, for building strong, secure communication channels, they should be an updated one. They should not be outdated. So if you're using any outdated SSL version, and that SSL version is under certain vulnerability, and that vulnerability information is again over the internet present and available, an attacker can again gain information. Based on that, they can design exploits. One part. Storing cardholder information. So definitely the systems and the servers where you are storing cardholder information, they should be using some strong hashing techniques to store password as hashes, not in plain text. At the same time, in the files and the directories where you're storing this information, and especially the systems or the servers where you're storing this kind of information, those systems and servers, they should be using some strong encryption techniques. They should be implementing some strong least privilege policies. Least privilege policies means even though on that system multiple users have access, only certain important critical users will have access to those critical files and directories, and those files and directories would be encrypted with some strong encryption techniques. Any questions still here from anyone? Okay. The next category is maintaining a vulnerability management program. Under this, we cover mostly the domain of vulnerability management. Under vulnerability management, we come up with certain stages. So under vulnerability management, we use some vulnerability scanning tools. Those tools are scanning your applications, systems, softwares continuously and frequently. So here it emphasizes that organizations should have a separate vulnerability management teams. Those teams should be regularly and more frequently running some vulnerability scans. Based on the scans, what vulnerabilities we receive, we have to perform some vulnerability assessment. And based on the assessment we do on the vulnerabilities which we have identified, we perform some remediations and rescanning at the end. So rescanning is mostly done as part of your validation and verification. So whatever vulnerabilities are actually identified at certain stages, through rescanning, we check that are these vulnerabilities really remediated or not? Is there any trace of certain vulnerabilities still available on certain systems and we might not have remediated them? So vulnerability scanning is like a continuous improvement process which associates scanning tools, and under assessment, it includes risk assessments. So when we are performing vulnerability management for a certain organization, including risk assessment under NIST 861 is very much important. The next category is strong access control and measures, and that will be taken care by Saman. So Saman, can you please?
Yeah, Thanks, Astha. So far we've gotten through the 3 categories of this PCI-DSS requirements. So it's a very famous saying that the only thing in cybersecurity is not to be, hack anybody's computers or data. It's something we have to relate it to our identities as well. So that identity is what we are protecting here. That is the cardholder data, which we are maintaining in our systems and which we're trying to make it as consider it as sensitive as possible for others not to misuse it. So it's really necessary to implement a strong access control measures. How we can do it? The first point is restrict access to cardholder data by business need to know. See, for example, I'll give you one good example. Like you have a lot of sensitive data stored at some site or somewhere where you work, and you would want that your data should not be leaked, or your data or your project's data where you have a lot of sensitive data of some other client where it is stored. So you would not want any other person, like you would want you and your team, and not exactly your complete team, to have a control on that data, but specific members of your team who are aligned to use that data. So that we mean by need to know basis. Need to know basis is majorly more towards who would need access to those data. Are they actually, authorized to use that data, to view that data, to edit that data, to play around with that data? It's really necessary that you define that who could actually access those folders. So that is first point of restricting accesses. So that means you are saving your data so that nobody else, none of the outsiders are able to access those sensitive data. Second is identify and authenticate access to system components. Okay, for example, I have an account in a bank and I am at the receiving end. I am, using their services. I hold a card from that bank. So if I go back to customer care and discuss all my queries that this has happened on my account and these are my transactions. So if anything done from the sender's end, like anything done from the banker side end, every individual who is performing anything on my account should have an access ID or should have some kind of tokens, so that at the time of checking, one could make out that yes, this particular thing was done by person A, this particular thing was done by person B, having this particular access ID. Because my account, I can do stuff on my account, but others who do it, I should know who all have done particular things on my account so that I could track it through the access IDs or through the tokens, whatever that person has been assigned to, so that it could be detected who did what. Other than that, you could also implement, like Aastha mentioned in her previous categories, having a strong password or, having special access tokens that should be used, or biometric, something like that should be accessible from the sender's end, so that if anything is done on anybody's accounts from not my end, but somebody's end, it could be tracked across. Other than that, you could also have multi-factor authentication, to check it more and authenticate who all are accessing your systems. So that covers the second point. Third is restrict physical access to cardholder data. Now, the first 2 points were on more of the transactional side, which you can do it online or, using your internet or stuff. The third point majorly is on the physical access. For example, you at your organization, I guess, would not be allowed to the server room from where all the data and everything is all operated and stuff. You are not the one who is allowed to enter that room. And if you want to enter, you would have to have certain level of accesses to enter that particular room. So that is why in any organization, we have different card system. Like, I am the visitor for a day, so I will hold a visitor card. Somebody else is an administrator, so would hold a different level of card, and he or she could swipe that room and enter into that room. But being a visitor, my card should not swipe at a place where I am not allowed to. So that is a place where my access should be restricted, and only people who should be allowed to enter that particular place should have those accesses. So for that also, one should be very careful in the case of like I have joined an organization, and then after I had those admin accesses for certain areas and for certain files, but after few years I've left that organization. My accesses are still in place although I have left that organization. So that is something really really not at all should be entertained, because I could use those accesses, not use, I should say misuse those accesses, and I could get hold of those sensitive data, which should not be allowed. So that is very important. When you provision somebody's access in your organization, it's really necessary that you are deprovisioning the accesses as well, like you are restricting all those accesses as well. So that sums up the implementation of strong access control measures. Aastha, over to you for the fifth one.
So just give me a second. Okay, so before I start the next one, I wanted to correct something. I mentioned something about the NIST pub standard, so NIST publication, which talks about vulnerability management. So the NIST correct publication is NIST 853. So it talks about privacy and security controls, and it covers vulnerability management and risk assessment. NIST 861, which I mentioned incorrectly, talks about incident response. So I just wanted to correct that. I just mentioned a wrong number. Okay, moving ahead. So the next set of category we have is regularly monitor and test networks. Under this category, the one strong control which would be used here is security, information, and event management tools. So tools like Splunk, Logarithm, IBM QRadar, they would be used here. So under this category, the first part says track and monitor all access to network resources and cardholder data. So when you are tracking and you are monitoring, mostly this part is done by logging your records. So whatever activities are happening in critical servers and systems and applications, and whatever actions are recorded in your network security devices or endpoint security devices like antivirus, intrusion detection systems, your firewalls, all actions would be collected in a centralized tool known as a SIEM tool. And that tool will be collecting log from various log sources together in order to build a picture of what's happening in an organization. So all in all, what we are trying to do is using logs, we are trying to get the records of all the activities happening at multiple places in an organization's environment. And based on collection of logs at one centralized location, which is your SIEM tool, we are trying to build a picture. Build a picture means, for example, if a packet entered the organization's network through a firewall, so when we have put several defenses in our environment, so the packet will follow the path of firewall, IDS, IPS systems, and finally through switches and routers, it will reach your system. That information will reach your system. Now, if something happens wrong or if some malicious activity happens, in order to track this, log monitoring, it becomes a very important and prominent part. Through logs, we can perform some real-time monitoring using these SIEM tools. We can collect live logs every day from all the log sources, maintain those logs for a specific period of time. So for example, when we talk about various compliances, they actually come up with a specific period of time till which you can keep these logs. So that particular time is known as log retention policy. So like, for example, we are discussing about PCI. PCI has its own log retention policy of maximum of 1 year. So till 1 year, you can keep certain logs, and after that, you have to delete them. In case of non-deletion, if you do not delete it and some external audit takes place, you will be asked the question, because this comes under the requirements. For example, if we move from PCI to some other type of compliance like HIPAA, which is healthcare based, they have their own log retention policies. So when we talk about this particular category of regular monitoring and testing your networks, the first part covers logging and monitoring using SIEM tools, tracking of all the activities regularly happening in the critical systems and servers through the log monitoring. By log monitoring, what we are trying to achieve is using these STEM tools, we'll be creating some kinds of alerts. We will be creating some kinds of reports. And through these log monitoring systems like SIEM, we can take some action. So through these systems, on a very basic level, we are trying to identify if something is going wrong, then how it is going wrong, what kind of resource, what kind of devices inside the environment those packets and information have touched, in order to find out what happened, when happened, how happened, how many systems are impacted, and how we can take actions at a very basic level, which is at the log level. This is one part. The second part talks about regularly testing security systems and processes. This again talks about usage of vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. So here, offensive techniques like penetration testings will come. What we are trying to achieve here is we are continuously trying to test our environment using offensive techniques like penetration testing, where the penetration testers, they actually are ethical hackers. They are performing certain stage of testing where they are thinking like attackers, and they are trying to get into the systems and desired applications which come under their scope of penetration testing. And based on that, they perform tests, some real-time tests, and identify what are some of the real vulnerabilities available in multiple systems, applications, and softwares. And based on that, they can get to know that in real time, if an attacker is trying to get into the systems, what are the various entry points, how we can remediate them, how we can compare these results with our vulnerability scans. So this will come under here. Then proper usage of your intrusion detection systems. Network intrusion detection systems are the different one, which are mostly at the boundary of your network. So testing your networks, like testing your applications like IDS, IPS, making sure your antivirus systems are up to date, and making sure that they contain all the latest updates of all the kinds of malwares and all the kinds of viruses. That becomes an important part. Under regular testing, again, are the system configurations, like whatever systems we are utilizing in real time, are their security configurations set right or not? Checking, like here, file integrity tools will be used. For example, if a person accesses some critical systems and they make some changes to that system, so that activity will also be monitored, like what changes happened in certain files and folders, when it happened, who did it. So all these kinds of testing should be done from time to time in order to identify anything, any kind of threat at a very initial stage. So when we are performing all these kinds of testings, we are making sure from our level, we are performing some active defenses. We are continuously checking if we might be under some attack. We'll implement some necessary security control as part of the remediations. Saman, the last one goes to you.
So covering the last category is maintaining an information security policy. So far we've come down to 11 requirements so far under 5 categories. So now one should know, what all are the requirements needed for, maintaining the, this PCI-DSS data. And upon working that, one should have a policy in place, and that policy should be made aware to all the employees for that organization. And every person should be made in loop and made to be aware of what all their responsibilities are towards what they're working for, and they have to protect that data. So maintaining a security policy would have a certain level of documentation, where they would have all kinds of policy covering all kinds of cases where they have to maintain their data and protect their data from all these attacks or all these different people, or they should restrict a lot of things. So there comes a lot of steps, like they should restrict wrong level of accesses to people who have access to certain level of data. So they should be restricting those accesses. Other than that, the employees are using the hardware technologies like their laptops, their mobile phones, and everything which they use in an organization, that should also go under, scrutiny, or, they should also be checked on regular periods, that they're not holding any kind of sensitive data which they are not allowed to. Like, I am working in department A, you are working in department B. So I should not have your department's data in my system. So that should come under a policy that every individual should be made aware of. Other than that, whenever we are hiring anybody in an organization, you all must have gone through that background check where you answer certain level of questions of having criminal records or certain other stuff. Wherever you have gone in front of lawsuits or stuff, you have given those yes or no answers. So that is also that also plays a very important role in these security policy checks. So one should be aware of who that person they are hiring into their organization, because having a check on these background stuff of that person will get you a good picture of that person, like what background he comes out from. Is he from that having a criminal record or certain lawsuits against him? So that will give you a good picture of that as well. So these all kinds of policy, depending on different organization and how sensitive data they hold off, they should create such policies, and that policy should be reviewed like in a period of time. Maybe depending on the sensitivity of the data, it could be reviewed quarterly, or it could be reviewed in 6 months or in 1 year, but it should be reviewed on a regular basis so that they could come up with something new which they wanted to add into their policies as per the situations. And they should make it a regular case to everybody, that they should know all these pointers about like what all they should take care of while working, so that it is not making them leak any kind of data to somebody external which he or she is not entitled to. So such policies should be very, very, very much into place if you have sensitive data in your organization. So that sums up all the 6 categories which we had to take up today. Next.
Yeah, I would like to add something to this. So one thing to remember here is that humans are the weakest link in security. So even if we have all set of right controls, for example, I and Saman, we talked about all possible security controls, and we can set up configurations, we can set up rules, we can use some very strongest of the tools which can identify activities. But if our human workforce is not trained right, there are chances there would be mistakes. So this maintaining an information security policy strongly emphasizes on that, making our human force strong enough to know about possible scenarios in security so that they understand their duty well. And second thing associated with this is insider threats. So mostly in the organizations, annually, when we look at some annual reports based on cyber threats across the globe, a lot of threats are associated with insider threats. So insider threats, they are associated with employees who intentionally tried to harm the organization, or unintentionally they might have fallen victim to an attack. So in order to reduce that category of insider threat, it becomes important for us to make our employees aware of all the policies, all the penalties associated if they are not following the right policies. And at the same time, if we are able to do so, that's why we have cybersecurity awareness trainings from time to time in the organizations now, so that even though the departments which are not involved in cybersecurity, they have the knowledge of handling data well. So that becomes really important at in this under this point. The final one is demo architecture. And Someone, would you like to explain it?
Yeah. So I would just give you a good example which you could easily relate to. I guess everybody would have done online shopping, and I should get a big, big yes from everybody if everybody has done online shopping, and they would have saved their card details at a certain level of time. Later, maybe you got aware about these cybersecurity tricks, and you would have, unsaved your card details from those websites and stuff, so that you do not fall into that loop of attacks. So you could easily get a scoop of what I'm telling you here. So what you usually do, you pick up your favorite outfits or stuff like that, you add it into your cart, and you just proceed to the checkout thing. So here it's a high level architecture diagram of how you could, the process works. So here we have certain terms which I want to first define them so that it gives you a good picture. The buyer is the person like me or you or anybody who is shopping on that online site. Then we have the merchant. The merchant is somebody from whom you are buying from. So it's the, the merchant, like whatever place you are going and buying that stuff from, that is the merchant and you are the buyer. Then we have the payment service provider. The payment service provider is usually gives you a software or a server or a platform where you could make your transactions for, and payment service provider and the payment gateway are both the same things, where you get across all these, for example, the merchant will not be able to set up a payment gateway on his own. So there comes the picture of the payment gateways. Usually you would heard like CC Avenue and others, etc. These are the gateways which come into picture on different sites. Then we have the acquiring bank, and the next we have the issuing bank. So the acquiring bank is the one where the merchant has its bank account, and it's usually the current account, not the savings. It's the current account where the merchant sets up his account details. And the issuing bank is us. Like, for example, I hold the card from XYZ bank. So that XYZ bank is the issuing bank for me, who gives me that debit or credit card, whatever you want to use on these sites. So what happens is usually the buyer picks up few stuff from the shop and they reach out to the merchant to get it billed. Then there comes the picture of payment service provider, and where you provide all your details of your issuing bank and stuff. You give all your details, and then it goes to the payment gateway. And from there, you would have usually gotten uh, there comes a step for the approval to get from the acquiring bank, that is the merchant's bank. And then you get the card association part where your Visa, MasterCard and these come into picture. And then by getting approval from your issuing bank, it checks that whether you have that much amount in your account or not. If you do not hold that much currency, then usually it rejects and you get a rejecting message that you do not have sufficient funds or anything, that your bank sends it to you. And if you have those amount, then it directly gets deducted. For online transaction, it usually takes seconds and it usually gets deducted, and you get a message that this much has been debited from your account. Otherwise, maximum it could take 3 days, to go from your issuing bank to the acquirer bank's account. So it usually takes 3 days. It's maximum it takes 3 days. If there are some issues, then it may take more than 3 days, but it happens between 3 days that the merchant receives that amount. And this is all the major, the processing architecture. And this only I covered here, the payment settlement architecture as well, of the amount as well, from the issuer bank to the merchant bank. So here what all we have to take in picture is, this is one of the architecture which we usually use in our daily lives. But by using this, we have to be careful about a lot of things. What lot of things is that we have already discussed about. So what all we have to bring into picture, one that I've already told is, do not save your card details. That's the first thing that you can do is, or someday you would get a zero balance in your account if anything happens. So follow all the policies, follow all the categories requirements which we have told you, and this way you will be safe in, safely handling your card holder data, so that it's all safe. Your name, your card details, your CVV number, everything is safe, and you're not saving it anywhere. Because if using net banking, if using your credit card details, you're actually giving out your credit card number, its expiry date, its CVV number, the name printed on it. So you're giving actually everything to the attacker. So that should be minimized here. So that's pretty much the architecture.
So yeah, so this is it from our side. If you guys have any questions, you can reach out to us separately as well. And we will be available in the Slack channel also for the OWASP throughout the week to guide you guys till the time we are completing the secure hackathon, transaction hackathon. So we would be there. Any questions?
Thank you both so much.